Good afternoon. The future of science in this room. Boy, I am in great company. It just warms my heart to see all of you. And the future and the things that you're going to do, you probably can't even imagine them right now. But I know you will. He's like, I don't know. Okay, you will. Okay, so my talk is it's not a lecture per se. I always have slides, but my students say, well, Prof, you never stay on the script. But I will try to, because I know you have a structure for this program. But I am delighted to be here. I really love the Africa Science Leadership Program, because my discipline, by the way, is leadership. And that is what I've spent my life studying, leadership. And I think it's really good that we're talking beyond just being a scientist, but how do you become a leader, and a leader having influence and impact based on your discipline. And so earlier, Connie asked me, can you please tell me what a strategic professor is? And I told her it's a nice word for semi-retired professor. So I just semi-retired after 35 years as an academic. And so I'm very happy that UP decided to keep me on, and I'm doing what I absolutely love. So I still have 2 doctoral students that I'm supervising, but what I love the most is that I'm a mentor to early career academics, focusing especially on women and African academics, to help them to see what I like to talk about, helping them to find their passion and their scholarly voice. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Oops, he told me to stay over here and I'm not even paying attention. Am I okay now? Sorry, I will be a good girl. So part of being a leader in your disciplines is very simple to me, and that's what I'm going to talk about. It's a long path, but I think what I want to get into your heads is an idea of how one goes about that journey. And I will share some of my own stories and trials and tribulations, okay? So being a research leader is about becoming a scholar in your discipline. And one of the things I'll just say to you from leadership, in order to lead anyone or lead anything, you have to have what? Well, you have to have followers, but more than that. In order to lead anyone or anything, influence. You must have the ability to influence them, to get them to do something. That's called influence. And so it's about having that power, the power of influence, to influence people to get motivated about something or to accomplish something. And that's really what leadership is about, influencing others for the good, always for the good. So I want to talk about this. And to me, and in my own story, and I'll share my story, let's start with this question. And somebody asked about my name. It's Nkomo, but out of my mouth is coming a very American accent. Yes, I am married to a South African. I've been in Africa for the last 18 years, so I am African. No 2 ways about it. But what does it mean to be a scholar? Let's unpack this thing that I'm going to try to persuade you about. What does it mean to be a scholar? What comes in your mind? An image, scholar. Learned person, thank you. What else? Scholar. Constantly researching. Good. What else? They have authority. Yes. Expert. Yes. What else? They mentor others. Okay. So let me just show you some images. So we think of scholars. You've mentioned some of them. We know that scholars talk, right? They lecture. They're curious, right? They ask a lot of questions. They write. But sometimes we think a scholar must be someone like Einstein. You must come up with a theory, a scientific theory that changes the world. Or maybe you have to be like Stephen Hawking, you see? And I think sometimes this overwhelms us, and we begin to set this hurdle that is really impossible. And so, yes, a person like Einstein comes along, what? Once in a generation? But I'm not saying you cannot be Einstein, that you cannot have that impact. There's lots of possibilities in this world. But from a kind of young, early career point of view where you are now, you have to be on that journey to becoming a scholar. And so it's really, as you indicated, we know scholars by what they do. We know scholars about what they do. That's how we recognize them. So one of the things about a scholar is they focus sharply. They're very focused on a particular question or area of research. And the understanding that they have becomes very sophisticated and deep. It's not shallow. They're committed to their field of interest, and I'll talk more about this. You cannot become a scholar if you're just doing something for instrumental reasons. I'm doing this research because it's the latest thing, or I've been told if I do this research, it's a safe type of research to do. That does not make one the kind of scholar I'm talking about. They strive for impact in knowledge, but also in practice. Now, this is what you said, they're constantly researching. Yes, a scholar, I'm going to read things about leadership. I'm interested in that. So anything about leadership, I'm going to read it. Nobody has to force me. Nobody has to watch me do it. So they immerse themselves in the knowledge. And they're very keen on keeping current. I will make these slides available. And this is number 4, the ability to articulate what's important in their field. And they're very clear about the research he or she does. I'm going to talk more about that. And this is where your voice comes in, where you're very clear about this is what my research is about, this is what it's not about, and this is the way I do it. You develop your own individual identity around what you do, right? If you think about people like Einstein or Stephen Hawking or some of the scientists you admire, don't they have a very unique, clear way of how they do their work? You can't be a scholar if you're just mimicking others. You cannot just mimic and copy. You must individualize yourself. They conduct high-quality research. They write and publish in high-quality journals. Although my pet peeve, I was deputy dean for research at UP before I retired, and I do think sometimes our institutions reduce us as scholars as this is all we do, right? The emphasis on publications and citations. And that is really steering young people the wrong way. It's much more than that. I'll say more about that. Okay. They actively participate in their scholarly community. So, to become a scholar, I think the key is finding your own voice. And I have 3 elements to that. The first one is, and notice I use the word claiming. You literally have to be almost conscious at the point when you decide to claim your voice, where your independence, you are now weaned from your supervisor, you've moved beyond your thesis, and now you claim, for my academic, for my career, for my journey, this is what I'm interested in, and this is what I'm going to focus on. So it's about declaring, it's about declaring an area of knowledge where you wish to make an impact. And it may not be what you did in your thesis. Are any of you at that point now? It may not be, yes, that's okay. It may not be the area in which you did your thesis. I'll talk more about that. The second one is your epistemology, your definition of truth. That is, what do you see as necessary for you to believe that something is true? Right? And then the last one is that you develop a methodology of doing your scientific work. Okay, that's a lot. That's a very abstract. Let me share my story. I started my life, not today. I would have never imagined that I would be sitting here as an A-rated researcher. It wasn't even within my scope of existence. I grew up in the Bronx. Anybody know New York City? The Bronx? Okay. The Bronx is known as one of the boroughs, not as fancy as Manhattan, the things you see in the movie. If you ever see a movie about the Bronx, it's always about gangs and crime, right? So I grew up in the Bronx, very poor. I have 9 brothers and sisters. My mother had a 5th grade education. My father had a 4th grade education, and they had 10 children. And contrary, the women will find this interesting. In New York City, they had a tracking system in the schools. And so in those days, that tells you how old I am. In those days, you were tracked. You were tracked by your class, your socioeconomic class, and you were tracked by your race and gender. So I came from a very poor family. So I was told in high school I wanted to go to college. You know, I'm in the 10th grade, and I'm having my interview with my counselor, and he says, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go to college. And he said, no, you can't. He just said, no, you can't go. You're too poor. You need to do something that would immediately get you a job. So, and I was also a woman, so he said, you will take the commercial track. And so then your senior year courses are typing and shorthand. So I started my life as a secretary, right? A very good secretary, because my parents stressed whatever you do, you must do very well. But I always wanted to go to college. And I went to work in a bank, and I was secretary in a bank. I don't want to bore you with the story, but this should show you how things happen. So I'm in the bank, and I'm watching all of these young white male executives come in. They come in, and then they get promoted. They come in with the suits. They know nothing about how the bank operates. They're asking me questions. You know, how do you handle this? And so I finally asked my manager one day, I said to him, I just want to know, how do I become like one of those people? And he said, well, Stella, you have to get a bachelor's degree. You have to go back to university. And that's what I did. I started going to school at night. Luckily, New York had a very good educational system, so even though I hadn't taken algebra and math and the college courses required, I could go to a community college, make up those classes, and then apply to university. And that's what I did. And so that began my career. But then I kept thinking, I want more. So my first goal was just to become a high school teacher, because I wanted to make sure no child got bad advice like I had gotten again. Yeah, I said, I'm going to become a high school teacher, and I'm not going to allow that. And then I went and did my student teaching and realizing there's no way you can teach high school. Nobody listens to you. And so then I decided to stay in corporate America, and now this is where the wake-up call came. So in corporate America, I got interested in my own experience there. Very few women, very few people who look like me. And I began to just ask myself, what does it mean to be a leader? Or what are the challenges in leadership when you don't fit the prototype, which was a white male? And so that was in the back of my mind. Eventually, I went into a PhD program, University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Yes. And so I went into the PhD program, and they said, what do you want to study? I said, I want to study what it means to be different in leadership. I want to look at race and gender. And again, they said, no, you can't. They said, no. You know what they said? That's not a scientific topic. And nobody's interested in that topic. So again, so what did I do? I'm a smart girl. I said, okay, what do you want me to do? I wanted the PhD, so I did an instrumental PhD. I did something my supervisor told me to do. But my passion was not in it. I had not found my scholarly voice. And so when I finished my PhD, I realized something. You know, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar at all. I have learned the techniques to produce a PhD. And I checked the boxes and I produced it. But it really wasn't what I wanted to do, and I could not see the impact of what I was going to have. So I discovered my scholarly voice because once I got my first academic position, and I published the kind of mandatory articles from the thesis, I published those, and I said, no, you know what? Have the courage, Stella, to now study what you really want to study. You're not handcuffed. That's one thing about being in academia. You're not handcuffed. And I realized, you know what? Now I can study what I want to study. And so I started doing research on black men and women in corporate America. And that is the research I've become known for, you know? And what kept me motivated, the very first study I did, I sent out a survey. We use a lot of surveys in my discipline. And in those days, you had to mail the survey and it come back through the post. Can you believe that? Now we do online surveys. That's how old I am when I think about that. And you're at your little post box and you're just hoping some surveys come back. But I get this one survey back and the envelope is really thick and I'm thinking, what is this? And it was a letter from one of the people who had gotten a survey, a black woman who wrote a poignant handwritten letter to me saying, thank you for doing this research. No one has ever asked me what it's like to be a black woman in a predominantly white context. She basically said, I am really suffering here and I'm glad someone's interested to write about my experiences. I still have that letter. And that letter gave me the confidence, but also the motivation that, you know what, this is important. This is important. So all I'm saying is that part about what area of knowledge where you want to make a difference and why. Why do you want to do this work you're doing? That is the thing that's going to sustain you when you're dead tired, right? When you don't necessarily have the funding for your research, when your papers get rejected, and I had a lot of papers rejected. That's what's going to sustain you, having that scholarly voice and passion about what you're doing. And so a reflection for you is, how do my identity, values, and beliefs about knowledge influence the research interest and how I do my research? Where are you in your research? Research is not something outside of you. It's part of your identity. So I hope you'll reflect upon that. Why did I decide to become a scientist? For what? What impact do I want to have? What do I bring to it that would have an impact? So you can talk about that later. So Ann Huff, one of my colleagues, says it's never too soon to start having an impact on your discipline. So you should anticipate making impact from the very beginning of your career. So you may be sitting here thinking, oh, it's too soon for me. But if you don't start thinking about how can I have impact, you probably never will, right? So the way I think about this, it can be intimidating to think about writing journal articles, but one of the things I found very helpful for me is that when you write a journal article or you give a talk, you're really having a conversation with the people in your field. So scholarly writing is a conversation with the others in your field. That's really what it is. It's not a journal article. It's trying to enter a conversation and to talk about that particular topic. And so it's an exchange of ideas. Not always pleasant, especially when people don't like your ideas or you get a rejection. And so your written work is going to be here long after we're all gone. It's the most enduring thing that you can contribute. in addition to impacting our communities. And so one of the things I would say about this, every time you think about writing something, you should be thinking about, who is my scholarly community? Do I know who they are? Who am I speaking to? And this has really helped me to be a more productive scholar. But that's not easy, right? It's not easy, is it? Okay? This is why I love this program, because the Africa Science Leadership Program is one way to begin to build that community. But it's also about realizing, even though you may be sitting in Tunisia, the Cameroon, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, you're part of a broader global community. You're not the only person interested in your field. So your community goes across borders. And you must have that perspective if you're going to have impact. You cannot be thinking narrowly about your scholarly community. You must think broadly, right? And that will help you to have impact. And I think sometimes that I see in my own field, I won't speak for your field, that people get caught up in saying, this only applies to South Africa. Well, then you're limiting your own impact. I'll talk more about that. So we have to think very broadly. My community is a very broad community. The conversation that's going on is a conversation that goes on around the world. You could ask me questions anytime. I'm an easy person. But here's an additional challenge for African scholars. And it's funny, you know, I was trained in the US at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And I married my husband many years ago. But you know, it's funny about America. America has real problems, our country. We know nothing about geography. We know nothing about the rest of the world. We only know one language, right? And we think everybody who comes immediately to the US must speak English, right? So, you know, even though I was married to an African and knew a lot about South Africa, one of the things I really did not understand was until I got here. And that was the marginalization of Africa in knowledge production. The marginalization of Africa in the knowledge production. And how much the West dominates the scholarly conversation in terms of the journals, what topics are accepted, right? The funding streams, right? I see people shaking their heads. Yeah, in management, yes. And this is one of our challenges, and I have been very passionate about this. I'm president of the Africa Academy of Management. I just finished that term, and we've been trying to help ourselves to break through that colonized approach to knowledge. And so I like the words of this post-colonial scholar. Can those on the margins, we shouldn't consider it, but we're considered to be on the margins, can they focus their research on national problems and at the same time speak to the universal? This is our little paradox. Because if you're not doing knowledge that benefits this continent and your country, then what good is it? I'm sorry. Africa will have to solve her own problems. Right? When I was driving in, I heard something and I felt like crying, that the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, asked the current Minister of Education to give him a plan within 3 months, an infrastructure plan within 3 months for schools in South Africa. Because just the other day, a 5-year-old child once again fell down an open pit latrine and died. Should this be happening in the 21st century? That a child cannot go to school without the danger of falling into an open pit latrine and dying. You see? That's what, in some of our countries, we're dealing with. And so, personally, there is a problem. The West dominates. But I believe now, I don't know what's happening in the science fields, but I can tell you in the management field, because Africa is seen as the new frontier, meaning customers. All those customers, right? Let's be realistic, that there's this window And all of a sudden, you know, everybody wants to come here and collect data. Oh, yeah, right. You know that, yeah. Oh, can I come and collect data? And then they take it back and you're left out and they write it up, right? And then, or, you know, so now, you know, you have these journals now. I don't know if it's happening in the science journals, like in the management, everybody calls me. Somebody just last week, Stella, we're going to do a special issue on Africa. Can you help us find some people? Or can some of our people come there and collect data on leadership and whatnot? You know what I told them? You know what? We have enough people here to do that research. We don't need you to come. But I think that because the space is opening up, we should take the invitation up, but on our own terms. And if we don't, I'm telling you, the others will. It will be colonization of knowledge, a different form of colonization, a different form. When, of course, we know Africa, before colonization, was a great knowledge producer. Go back and read some of the history of Timbuktu. You know, if colonization hadn't happened, we'd be in a very different place. So there could be a new form of colonization, because I'm telling you, at least in my field, all of a sudden everybody's interested in management and leadership in Africa. They're even studying Ubuntu, you know, for the South Africans. They want to know about this Ubuntu. So this is a challenge. So how do we deal with this? So, you know, I don't want to bore you with figures, but our research is increasing, but not at the pace to keep up with the increase in the rest of the world. So Africa is doing better, but everybody else is ahead of us too. The continent is, this bothers me, number two, the continent is home to 15%, of the world's population, 25% of the global burden of disease, but produces just 2% of the world's research output. And we have 198 researchers per million people compared to 428 in Chile, over 4,000 in the US and the UK. It has been said that for Africa to catch up with the rest of the world, we need to produce another 1 million PhDs. Another 1 million. Another 1 million. Can you believe that? Knowledge production is a huge frontier for us. A lot of our governments focus on lots of other things, but we're missing the focus on PhDs and knowledge. You cannot be a competitive nation or a competitive continent without people who are engaged in knowledge production. And we need, this is why you're so important. I hate to put a heavy weight on you, but you're so critical to filling that gap, you know? And so, capacity and resource constraints. But as I said, I think there is a window of opportunity. And I like to think about the fact that we should be bold. We should be assertive. We should be willing that we engage in what I call shifting the center. Why does the West have to be the center of knowledge? Why can't we be the center of knowledge? You believe that? Look at you like, yeah, I think we have to have bold thinking, right? Yes. We don't need to stay on the margins. We must assert ourselves into the global conversations in your discipline and begin to change them. Because I will tell you this, what is taken as the whole of knowledge cannot be possible. If you have only studied a phenomenon from a particular country or particular sample of people, like in leadership, 95% of the knowledge of leadership has been samples of white males, mostly from the USA. The big corporate leaders, you know, they become the models of leadership. But there's many other ways of doing leadership. So we cannot allow one dominant, this is how we deal with disease, and say this gives us the answer to everything. Knowledge cannot be complete if you've only sampled very narrowly. So we must disrupt this idea that there's some universal knowledge. You cannot say that until you have, if you have now sampled across the world and you say this is the body of knowledge, then I'll believe you. But if your sample has only been this, I cannot believe you. You get my point? This is important. So I think we, as the way I started changing my thinking after being brought up in a very narrow American view of the context, that, you know, if we can think this way, we have the local context, your home country, then the continental context, and then the global context. So we're trying to enter 3 conversations. And how do you enter those 3 conversations simultaneously? Because you have to. I'm not saying that you should exclude the global. You can't. Because the phenomenon we're dealing with, for example, climate change, that's a global issue. Food security, that's a global issue. But I think the way our frame, our mindset, that we have to think about this. This is another one of my pet peeves. I hate that our universities in Africa, many of them, I hope yours don't do that, are really telling people, if you want to get high citations, don't collaborate with scholars in Africa, collaborate with international scholars. Are you hearing that? Bad advice. Bad advice. That's what I said. Sometimes we do it to ourselves. And then when they use the word international, I said, okay, so if I'm sitting in the Cameroon, Tunisia is international to me, right? Yeah. By international, they mean what? The West. And yeah. And that's very bad advice, because the power that you could have from collaborating with each other, given that we have resource and capacity constraints, will enable you to build capacity, to build these networks. So I do hope one of the outcomes of this program will be collaboration and ties to deal with common problems across borders. There's strength in numbers. We have to build a critical mass, right? And so how do we do this? So can I just tell you quickly about 2 strategies that I have figured out from my discipline? Because it's sort of like one has to be pragmatic. So if you're a young early career academic and you're at your institution and they require you to publish in those high-ranked journals, right? Well, you got to do that to keep your job. So part of having power is to figure out, I don't want to say the game, but to figure out how to maneuver. It is a game, I know. But how do I maneuver in this space? And so, yes, you need to have publications in the top journals, right? You do. There's no 2 ways about it. I would be remiss if I said to you, don't do that. You have to. But now, what's the problem sometimes with the top journals? What have you heard? What challenges do you face? Yeah, this is a challenge. It is. And we know that. I don't know if you saw the movie Black Panther. Everybody's seen that movie. But you know, the scene at the end when they decide to go to the United Nations, and then the people are like, but excuse me, you come from a 3rd world country, you think you have something to offer us? Yeah. So as soon as they see South Africa or Tunisia or the Cameroon, the whole stereotype of Africa. You know, when I announced I was at the University of North Carolina, and when I told my colleagues, South Africa is now liberated and my husband wants me to go with him back home, you know what my colleagues said to me? Oh, Stella, we feel so sorry for you. One even said to me, a PhD senior professor, he said to me, but what are you going to eat? I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I said, what do you mean? They have food there. He said, they're starving in Africa. But yeah, so this idea that nothing good ever comes out of Africa, so what could this person possibly have in this article that would be of benefit to me, because I'm sitting in the country that produces all the knowledge? Yeah. One more point, because I'm looking at, I'm getting like, okay, I'm going to pull you off the stage looks.
So I like your point that you said earlier that we are our own worst enemies sometimes, because one thing that we see in my university, the University of Ghana, is when you're on a paper with 10 other authors, so it's big collaborative research, and you are applying for promotion, it comes up as, so what did you contribute? Yeah, and everyone is saying we should do multidisciplinary research. Yeah. You need more than 6 people on a paper, and we don't understand that yet. It's a big problem.
I agree, and the leadership is a problem, yes, and instead of pushing the collaboration, yes. So here's a couple of ways of kind of like hoodwinking. I call it like hoodwinking the scholars in your field. like kind of trick them. I call it the outside in. So one strategy is outside in. I just gave it these names. See if you can figure it out here. Making the familiar appear novel. Making the familiar appear novel. Okay, so the outside in strategy, you ask a commonly studied question in the West or some theory that's been out there in the West, and you study it in the African context. So you set up this kind of idea that everybody says, according to the current theory, that X causes Y. Okay? So your colleagues, when they're reading that, you know, you're beginning the article, they recognize all of that. But now your sample is Africa. But what you have to show them, by bringing Africa or studying this issue in Africa, we learn something new about this theory that we didn't know before. I can tell you that works in our field. So for example, you have to show how a context variable sets a boundary on that existing theory or knowledge or hypothesis or construct. But here's where some of the papers fall short, because I'm an editor of many journals. They just say, this research has never been done in South Africa, so therefore the contribution of this paper is the first paper on this that's ever been done in South Africa. No, that doesn't work. What you have to say is when we look at this theory or this phenomena in this African context, which is characterized by this, it changes the idea that X causes Y. You have to disrupt the knowledge. You get people's attention. You see what I'm getting at? So let me give you an example from my field. So relate the novelty of the new context to expanding or questioning, be bold, questioning the existing knowledge. You're all looking at me skeptically.
So you mean like, you know, like you don't have to say like this is like the first piece of research done in like Egypt or in Africa?
No, people don't buy that. That's not a contribution to say it's the first time it's done. It's more important, what does it mean? So don't ever say this is the first time this has ever been there. That's probably a desk reject. In my field, it's a desk reject. Because you haven't told me. Think about what I said before. It's a scholarly conversation. So if I'm going to engage you, I got to get your attention that you're going to learn something different about this theory. That's what you got to do, not to say, because people, okay, well, what if you just did it in Africa and you get the same result? You just tested it in a different sample. That's not what people are looking for. The top journals want some unique contribution to knowledge. And believe me, there are many things that you can look at. Let me quickly show you an example from my field, and then I'll take a question. So so when I came here now I come to South Africa. Now I have had a long career, but now I'm in South Africa. So of course all my data are going to come from South Africa. So I'm pretty much, okay, so now how do I'm not going to be flying to the US to collect data. I'm here. And I'm still studying leadership. But now I got to talk to my colleagues in the US. So one of the things I observed here as soon as I came and saw that South Africa was going through unbelievable changes. I came in 2000. And so the transition from apartheid was hot. I mean, there was a lot of things happening in companies. And so I started recognizing a gap in our so-called universal knowledge on leadership. Most leadership research only looked at what does it mean to lead change when your competitive environment is changing. All of our leadership knowledge is change leadership. We have a whole discipline called change leadership, but all of the theory is about here's what you do if you're leading change and your competitors have increased. Then I got to South Africa and I started talking to business people, and they were talking about, we feel like the whole rug is being pulled from under us. The nation is changing politically, economically. And then I did a research project. So I asked the question, how did the South Africans leaders lead change in their organizations precipitated by a changing national context? National context had never featured in the study of change leadership. Can you believe it? Why? Does that make sense to you? Why American scholars looking at change leadership would never ever think that maybe the nation is changing? You can see why. Why? They were studying only in America. We haven't had any revolutions in America in the last 250 years. You see? We didn't go from apartheid system to freedom. So they never looked at this national context. So that paper got published because people were like, wow, but you know this, yeah, we should study nations now and how they impact leadership. So you see, my point is not so much my example, but thinking about what is it about the context that may affect the, so that's called the outside-in strategy. Let me ask the question there. Sir, did you forget your question?
Just my answer about the previous study, previous slides, I'm sorry. Just about maybe as we are African researchers, not be or failed to show the importance of our national and regional research to the around the global context. Maybe we need more and more show up our research, show the importance of our personal status or regional status to the about the international level or among the international level. Maybe this is a part to help us to overcome the challenges in this area.
I agree. I agree. I think there should be more regional cooperation and regional impact. Yes, definitely. That is another strategy. That would be important.
So why you don't like to usually to mention this is the first time to study in Africa? You told me to my colleague, it's part of the rejection when you told the first time to study in Africa or no available data about this part, blah, 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 in Africa. I think it's one of the important to market my data.
Well, you can't, if that's okay to say that, but remember, it's a contribution to knowledge, not that something was the first time. So, you know, what impact did it, your research, whatever topic it is, let's say you're doing malaria. So you studied it in Africa. This is the first time we've had an Africa. So what did you learn about malaria that was different or new? That's more important. How did it expand our thinking about malaria or malaria treatment? That's what people want to read, you see? So a simple example I use is that, you know, if you go up to somebody, people like football, right? Football, like I know nothing about football. But imagine some very seasoned football people who know football left and right. They know all the teams. They understand all the language. They're at a cocktail party, and they're talking about the latest football game from Manchester or whatever these groups are. I don't know who they are. And they're having this very sophisticated conversation. And then I walk up and I say, you know, it's really amazing that people can score with their heads. What do you think those people are going to do? They're going to look at me like I'm an alien and walk away. Excuse me, we want to get another drink. I'm not adding anything at the level. So you have to engage that conversation where it is. So being the first time this was ever done in Africa, I'm sorry, is not a contribution. The contribution is to the theory or the prediction or whatever. That's what it is, right? You understand that? That's very important because editors, that drives us crazy when people say this is the first time. Even for me, and I'm very open to papers from Africa. Yes, sir.
I think scientific research is all about novelty. It's not about location. So
yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. You said it very well. Novelty, something new, not the location. It's what is it about that location or the geography or the landscape of that location that might change the phenomena, you see? The last one is inside out, making the novel appear familiar. So this is where there's something so unique to Africa or South Africa, your country. And you see, Americans have a big problem with that, you know, especially on some of the cultural stuff that they don't understand. But here you study a phenomenon unique to Africa inside the continent of the country, and then you show the implications for an existing theory of body of knowledge, you know? So this is something that would be very peculiar to this country. Maybe there's a type of disease that only occurs here that doesn't occur somewhere else, and you study that, but then you show maybe it has implications for some general body of disease or something. So you can study local phenomenon, but then show others how they can learn something from it. Okay? So connect your observations, empirical analysis of local phenomena to familiar concepts in the existing literature. So you got to talk the language is what I'm saying. You have to show where you're entering the conversation and how. I'm almost done. So what do you need to know to use these strategies, what I found? Now these strategies might not work for you. The point is the novelty and also that you can work from where you are. I told people, they like, I got my A rating while I was in South Africa, and I've only been using South Africa data. So it's not like I'm flying to America and getting data there. So what do you think you need to know to do this? Well, first of all, you got to have good theoretical and empirical conversations in your discipline. You have to keep up. You got to know the conversation. So if I had done my homework before I went up to those people in the soccer and having the cocktail and not say something so stupid, they probably would have engaged me. Put careful thought into planning your research questions, designing your research. The number one question is, what is the contribution here? What's novel about this? Have knowledge of the high impact journals in your field. I won't even talk about another scary form of colonization that's happening for Africa. Predatory journals. Predatory journals. Africa is one of the biggest victims of predatory journals. They are preying on us, I'm telling you. Please, I don't have time for that conversation, but I'm just alerting you. Seek collaborations. I talked about this with scholars in your discipline, both continentally and internationally. That's fine, but don't leave out the continent. Be clear about your scholarly voice. You need to be bold. I tell people, this is what I study. I look at tough questions, race and gender. And this is how I study it. Declare your voice and be confident about it. Perseverance, you got to hang in there. You will get rejections. You will get discouraged. That's why you guys must become supporters. You must be supporters of each other. You must support and encourage each other. You know, in the African American tradition, we have a saying, okay? Lift others as you climb. I'll say it again. Lift others as you climb. So there's nothing wrong with you achieving, but bring a few other people with you. Use individual achievement. If you're going to be a leader, that's what a leader does. A leader helps other people to become everything they want to be. You will have the biggest impact that you could ever have. So here's a little quote I like to use from a leadership book. If not us, then who? If not from Africa, then whence? If not now, then when? We can't wait. If not for Africa and humanity, why not? Let Africa rise to the challenge. It is our destiny. It's in our hands. And the last thing is this. The challenge of being talented. All of you are in this room because you're very talented. There's promise. I understand a lot of people were applying to be in the seats that you're in. Do you know that? And you were selected. You are special. Yes, you are. Yes. You're talented. But I like this quote from Benjamin E. Mays. He was the mentor of Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "A crown has been placed upon your head. Now you must rise to it." So I wish you all well, and I know you're going to rise so high. We'll see you up there in the clouds. So good luck. Thank you.